Guys, welcome to my new video, and I'm super excited to be talking about some of the huge balancing changes that came out towards dungeons and raids. There's been some really big nerfs towards dungeons that are perceived to be bad, mechanics that are bad, mobs that are a bit too strong. So overall, seeing Blizzard making these changes is really interesting because they're making them quite quick, and it gives me hope in terms of, you know, quicker balancing changes coming out from Blizzard in terms of not only dungeons, maybe possible classes as well in the future. But again, let's look at some of the crazy dungeon changes. We'll look at the raid changes at the end of the video, so keep that in mind. So dungeon raid, manifestation of pride, so this is the prideful affix, now sees through stealth and invisibility effects. This is purely, or at least this change is impacted by the fact that the MDI happened a couple of days ago, and in MDI a lot of people were skipping prideful by just using Shadow Melt from Night Elves. Is this going to change that? No. Because all you have to do is just, you have to run away from prideful a bit further and then use your Shadow Melt abilities and things like that. So generally speaking, not sure if they achieved what they wanted with this, or I'm not 100% sure what they're trying to achieve with this. But generally speaking, I do feel that skipping pridefuls in MDI is a bit of a cheesing kind of deal. Let me know how you feel about this. Now, live server changes that are going to impact players more than this prideful change. So Plaguefall, how many people are hating the last boss, Margrave, in terms of tanking, in terms of healing, the disease that happens there, the healing on the move that is required. It is really rough. So Margrave is getting nerfed. Plaguebound, devoted health and damage is reduced by 40%. Now, what is Plaguebound? These are the small adds that spawn around the boss, and they're a nightmare to tank because most tanks don't have limited amount of taunts. They can't attack them, they're ranged. So generally speaking, the health and damage reduced by 40% is absolutely massive, and it's going to be less of a headache towards your tanking buddies who really hate this encounter. Now, reduce the cast frequency of Infectious Rain during her final phase. This is one of the biggest things in terms of healing requirements for healers. This boss in terms of healing is probably one of the roughest one, especially on Tyrannical, and it's because of this Infectious Rain. This happens and gives you 4 stacks of a disease. It can be dispelled, but if you don't have any of those disease dispellers, you're gonna get those 4 stacks. And during the last phase, you might have to move. So you're going to have this huge healing requirement that also requires you to move. And if you're not a healer that can move easily and heal on the go, it becomes really annoying. So what they're doing, they're reducing the cast frequency. So I'm assuming, without fully testing this, is that Infectious Rain is going to happen around 2 times on 45 weeks. During the last phase. This is her final phase, during the 3rd phase. So maybe you're only going to get 1 Infectious Rain during 45 weeks, and during Tyrannicals you might get 2 instead of 3. So the healing requirement is going to be reduced substantially during the last phase. So that's really welcome. And on top of that, slightly adjusted the timing of Plague Crash, so there's a little more time between tentacle slaps. This is something that I've seen a lot of people failing because of the radius of the tentacle slaps, because there is certain bugs associated with this. So any kind of improvements towards this are very much welcome. Now let's go on to one of the least popular dungeons in the game at this given point, and I'm gonna go and show you a graph that's gonna indicate the popularity of these dungeons. This is sub-creation data for Fortified, Spiteful, Volcanic, Prideful Week, and this is based on completed runs from 16 to 23, so this is generally high-end. And in terms of the completion rates and success rates, you'll notice that SD, or Sanguine Depths, is pretty much the lowest there. You see, again, the other side, Theater of Pain not being great. Necrotic Wake, you'll see the amount of nerfs it received. It doesn't have the lowest success chance because in an organized group, especially if you have a rogue, it becomes easier. But I just wanted to showcase you the difficulty of dungeons based on this week, and this is pretty much can be said for a lot of affixes. So let's go and look at some of the changes to Sanguine Depths. So Sanguine Depths, one of the biggest issues are bosses. There are a couple of trash packs that are really annoying, but generally speaking, fix an issue where Flying Chamber Sentinels would fall or fail to contribute enemy forces requirements. This is some bug that, again, bug fixes, always welcome. This is the big ones. Crisis, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. The first boss. This is really terrible on Tyrannical weeks. Honestly, on a pug that's not sure how to do it, this is going to be most likely a wipe, and you're gonna end your run at this given point. So Severing Smash, damage reduced by 20% on all difficulties. Essence Absorption, damage reduced by 20% on mythic difficulty. So the first boss is really annoying because the fact that the orbs, when you soak them, they do a ton of damage and it's all controlled by the healer. On tyrannical weeks, one of the most popular strats is to just kite the boss, to basically kite it from one end of the room to the other and not soak any of the orbs because they're so bad. And after that, if you take too long to soak the orbs, the overlaps with the AoE damage or the charge ability, you get this terrible overlap that you can just swipe. So this boss is, in my eyes, is one of the most difficult bosses in terms of organizing it properly. On tyrannical weeks, I think it's insanely annoying, and any nerfs towards this is very much welcome. They're also looking at the second boss, and as Executor Tarval, fleeting manifestation health is reduced by 20%. So these are all basically healer related. How many times the second boss has been nerfed so far, because it is really terrible. A lot of the raid or a lot of the Mythic Plus pusher groups are going to combine Prideful with Heroism Bloodlust in order to nuke this boss down, because it becomes really annoying. One of the main reasons is that when the ad spawns, it deals AoE damage, and healer has to deal with that. That's fine, but there's also a fixate ability on this boss, where one target or one person is going to be fixated and they're going to be taking a lot of single target damage, which again is fine. But during phase 3, not phase 3, or during the third time a person gets fixated, there's also going to be an ad spawn overlap. So all of a sudden you have AoE damage to deal with on top of the single target huge damage incoming. And this overlap is really annoying. So the main thing to do is you need to heal the person who gets fixated, and you also need to make sure to kill the ad. The fleeting manifestation health reduction is really strong, but let's hope that the people that are doing this dungeon, please focus on the ad. The ad is the main thing that needs to die here. It's the most important. Don't focus on the boss. If the ad spawns, priority numero uno. This is going to help out your healer a lot, and again, very welcome changes. Now we're going to Spires of Ascension, and honestly I kind of wanted more changes here, but Spires of Ascension is actually not a hard dungeon to time at this given point. So Lakesi, Klotos and Astronos, I'm butchering these names, again these fixes in terms of getting counted, but Oppression now increases damage taken by 1% per application instead of 2%. Now, what are these mobs? What are these Lachesis? I don't even know what they are. Let's go and look at MDT. So these mobs are actually the last 3 mobs at the end of the dungeon before you do Devos, the last boss. And these, honestly, on 45 weeks are really annoying. They drop these little patches, and then they have these like shadows coming out that could almost one-shot you. Some of these mobs are going to apply a debuff, and the debuff has been nerfed. Now, what would I wanted to also change? I think these mobs are a little overtuned on 45 weeks. A lot of the times the groups will use a specific Kyrian dungeon ability on them, on this mob, and they'll also use Heroism or Bloodlust to nuke it down because the dot is so painful. The dot can be evaded or can be abused by hunters if they use Feint Death. It drops off, and a lot of the immunities will get rid of it, but generally speaking this mob is a little bit overtuned in terms of what it does. What I really wanted is that how many people have done this boss and noticed the angel wings in the background flapping around, getting in your way? You can't scroll out with your camera, and on top of that you have to dodge all of these shadow abilities coming from 20 different directions. Please, Blizzard, remove all of these angel flapping nonsense that gets in my way. I can't see anything in this encounter, and this is the hardest part of the dungeon, and partly because my view is always obscured. So any nerfs to this is very welcome. Please reduce the clutter that's available on the very end of the platform in this Spires of Ascension dungeon. Now let's move on to Necrotic Wake. And honestly, there is too much to talk about Necrotic Wake changes. So basically the way that I'm going to say it is that everything got nerfed. But the main things that got reduced for Necrotic Wake, it basically got obliterated in terms of what a dungeon Necrotic Wake was. The biggest thing, when Blood Javelin and Discharge Anima hits, well, this is the MDI. We're going to talk about the MDI. When Blood Javelin and Discharge Anima hits more than 8 enemies, the total damage is distributed evenly across all targets. This is a nerf purely because in MDI you saw this crazy pull where you can go up the platform after the second boss, you can pull everything, you can die, everything's going to be snapped, and you can use your Javelin and Discharge Anima to basically kill all of the mobs. This is an MDI nerf. It's not going to affect majority of people out there. The thing here, Kyrian armaments, so Javelin, Shield, Discharge Anima, Forgotten Hammer, now persists through death. This is the biggest change, and this is going to make the dungeon from being a pretty hard dungeon to probably being, I'm probably gonna say, on the easier side. The biggest thing that's going to annoy people is that if they die with the javelin, if they die with the anima, if they died with the hammer that they were going to use on specific mobs, all of a sudden they don't have them. They're not gonna meet the DPS checks, and all of a sudden the dungeon it's over. So the fact that it's going to persist through that means that there's a lot more leeway. If you're going to wipe, the dungeon can still be timed. You can still fix this. And on top of that, you get a huge nerf across the board in terms of all of the annoying mobs and a lot of the mobs, a lot of the... Again, I have to mention the second boss, one of the most annoying bosses in the game in terms of pugging. So they reduce the range of skeletons being summoned, which is huge, because you get these skeletons that are going to be spawned from left, right side, and they need to be interrupted, they need to be stunned, they need to be CC'd, and if they're not CC'd, they're going to do a huge amount of damage and things like that. So that's really, really cool. Their damage has been reduced, the volley damage has been reduced. Honestly, this is a huge change. So let's go and look at MDT in terms of how the routing might change or what's going to happen. So basically, when you look at Necrotic Wake, a lot of these things have actually been nerfed. Like, majority of the mobs here have been nerfed to some extent. So the hardest bosses you're going to have in this dungeon are going to do with things like Necromancers. Necromancers have actually not been nerfed, but the mobs around them, like the mages, like the warriors, they've all been nerfed. This mob here, Narzudah, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, has also been nerfed. Really, really annoying. A lot of the times, people will use some sort of the ornament or the javelin or spear or whatever on these mobs. On top of the fact they might use it on this here as well. Again, like I mentioned, warriors have been nerfed, mages have been nerfed. They might use a certain weapon on them. They might use a certain weapon on this trash bag pull G25. These are really, really hard. These all pulls, because of the warrior damage, because of the crossbowman damage, because of the mage damage, they become really, really hard. You have to basically nuke down Necromancer, and you can CC other mobs, but all of this has been nerfed. All of a sudden, they don't pose as much of a threat anymore because, again, Blizzard has seen that these mobs are pretty annoying. In terms of other changes, you'll notice that, again, the initial pulls here, Stitched Vanguard has been nerfed, Corpse Harvesters have been nerfed. Basically, a lot of these things. And we might see a different trash bag pulls in here, which will be interesting. A lot of people will go around here, kill the boss, will use the Kyrian abilities here and go around here. They might skip this. Maybe they're not going to skip this anymore. Again, these are going to be easier. These are going to be easier. The boss is going to be easier to kill. And upstairs, there's quite a few changes. Really, really, the most important changes upstairs are going to do with the fact that these things, Kyrian Stitchwork, have been nerfed. The biggest thing that they do, tenderize. This dot on a tank, if you're not paying attention, will probably destroy you. The fact that these tenderizers or these Stitchworks cannot be slow, they cannot, like, you literally cannot kite them, with the exception of maybe a hunter using their pet to taunt or someone else using to taunt in order for the tank to drop off stacks. These mobs become really, really annoying and fortified, and the nerf to them is really, again, super welcome. In terms of Corpse Collector, this has also been nerfed, and Corpse Collector can be really annoying because it requires an interrupt. If you don't interrupt Gore Splatter, especially on fortified weeks, this is going to be really, really, really rough on your healer. Again, they have been nerfed. So if you look at the overall combination of Necrotic Wake nerfs, there is a lot of quality of life improvements here. Again, the main one, the weapons persisting through death, really, really nice. And that concludes our dungeon nerfs, and we're going to look at the raid. And now, if you enjoy the raid content, again, you'll see that there's a lot of really wanted nerfs. Now, first of all, Council of Blood has been nerfed. There's nothing to do with mythic nerfs here, so this is more to do with the group sizes. Damage reduced by up to 20% in smaller raid sizes, and this is due with Deadbolt Volley, Drain Essence, and Dark Recital duration. Again, Dark Recital is where you get selected with the person, and this can usually cause some issues. Has been reduced to 6 seconds on normal heroic difficulty, well, 7 seconds. So there's nothing really crazy with mythic raiding, but again, these are quality of life improvements, I guess, for smaller raid groups, because Council of Blood does seem to cause a lot of issues, and Council of Blood for a lot of time was regarded as one of the hardest bosses for pugs to handle. So let's go to some of the mythic changes, and there's a lot of Sludgefist changes. All the sudden colossal roll damage reduced by 10%, Chain Slam damage reduced by 35%, Chain Bleed damage reduced by 35%. So this is all to do with soaking and how to manage that bleed effect on the members. Keep in mind, this is going to be reducing the healing requirement, especially maybe the personal cooldown requirement for the people who are going to be soaking the chains. It's also interesting to see that maybe the colossal roar damage reduction might mean that guilds who do not have the damage requirement to kill the boss, they might be dropping a healer. So maybe from 4 to 3. I'm not sure. This will be very interesting to see if there's going to be a healing requirement, or maybe dropping a healer is going to be the way to go in order to meet the DPS requirements. This is your DPS check, to some extent healing check as well, and the healing reduction, or the the healing damage coming out is being reduced, is a nice welcome change, I guess, in my eyes. And the best changes, in my opinion, is going to be to do with Stone Legion Generals, because this boss is actually garbage. It's pure garbage, because in Mythic, it's one of those things like Zakul, if you remember Zakul. It's one of those fights where you might have to hold DPS because you want to have a better transition phase. Because the way the boss is made, holding DPS, cheesing certain phases is the way to go. And across the board, you see that health reduced by 10%. You can see that there has been buffs to the encounter. You can consider them buffs. So for example, you can see the serrated swipe, serrated tear, and Stonefit range increased to 100 yards instead of 10 to 20. So these can't be avoided anymore. They can't be outranged. You can see that overall the damage reduced on those abilities by 20%. Heart range increased to 300 yards, was 10 yards, so you can't avoid it. This is a really big one. Heart Rend no longer applies Heart Hemorrhage to the player to spell the magic effect of mythic difficulty, so this might mean that the priests are doing master spell and things like that, they might not need APT on Ancestral Protection Totem on them, and that's very interesting. We'll see how that's going to affect the difficulty. In general, this is the big one. This is the huge changes that are gonna make this encounter from being total garbage to maybe being a semi-decent fight. General Kyle and General Grashal's spell cooldowns now reset with phase changes. This is what made the fight really weird. When you transition, sometimes, their abilities don't reset. And this is why people would hold damage in order to get better transition phases. And holding damage in a fight is never good design. So this is huge. So Blizzard's comments with this is that with the Stone Legion's general fight, in addition to slightly reducing the overall difficulty, we're making changes to make it feel more consistent between attempts. This means that with certain abilities are no longer avoidable, the impact together with other abilities should be more realistic to manage, and the order in which they occur should be more reliable. This is really welcome. And honestly, guys, I want to hear your opinion on all of these changes. I want to hear how you feel about the dungeon nerfs. Do you think certain dungeons escape a couple of nerfs? Do you think certain dungeons are a bit more annoying than others? Let me know how you feel about this video. And if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you in my next guide.